two people stand in the same city on the same day after the collapse. Both are prepared. Both spent years buying what they believed was the right gear, and yet one of them is dead within 72 hours, while the other disappears and survives. The difference was not courage, intelligence, or luck. It was timing. Most people imagine collapse as a single moment, a switch that flips from normal life to survival mode. That belief is lethal. Collapse does not arrive as one event. It unfolds in phases, and each phase rewrites the rules of what is useful, what is dangerous, and what draws attention. Gear does not become useless because it is poorly made. It becomes dangerous because it was designed for a different phase than the one you are actually living through. In the early moments of collapse, visibility is what gets people hurt. Later, dependence becomes the killer. After that, isolation finishes the job. The same piece of equipment can move you closer to safety in one phase and turn you into a liability in the next. This is the quiet mistake that kills experienced preppers. They prepare for a collapse, not for how collapse evolves. A plate carrier makes sense when violence is chaotic and unstructured, but it becomes a liability the moment checkpoints, searches, and sorting appear. A generator feels like security when the power first goes out, yet it turns into a beacon once fuel is scarce and sound carries. A perfectly packed solo survival kit feels empowering until survival stops being a technical problem and becomes a social one. None of this gear failed. The phase changed. Collapse is not a test of how much you own. It is a test of how quickly you can shed what no longer fits the environment you are in. Carrying yesterday's solutions into today's phase makes you slower, louder, and dependent on systems that are already dead. This breakdown is not about ranking equipment or mocking preparedness. It is about identifying the moments when good gear turns into dead weight, and what must replace it if you intend to stay alive. There are 4 collapse phases that matter, not because they come from theory, but because they emerge repeatedly whenever power, law, logistics, and trust fail. Each phase has its own primary killer. Each exposes a different weakness, and each demands a different replacement principle. By the end of this, you should not feel excited. You should feel slightly uncomfortable, because you will recognize that some of the gear you are most proud of would betray you at exactly the wrong moment. The goal is not to be prepared. The goal is to be phase-aligned. The shock window is the most misunderstood slice of a collapse because it looks deceptively familiar. Lights may still be on in some blocks, stores may still have people inside, traffic may still move, and authorities may still appear on the streets. That surface normality tricks you into treating the situation like an inconvenience instead of a rapidly closing window. In this phase, the danger is not that you are unprepared. The danger is that you are prepared in a way that increases your visibility, your friction with other humans, and your dependence on systems that are already failing. Here is the rule that matters most in the first hours and days. You are not being judged by what your gear can do. You are being judged by what your gear signals. In the shock window, people do not have stable information, so they make fast decisions based on cues. A big backpack, tactical clothing, a bulky vest, a machete strapped externally. Even the confident posture of someone ready can function as an invitation, not necessarily to criminals, sometimes to desperate families, sometimes to nervous police, sometimes to opportunists looking for an easy inventory transfer. The moment you are read as resource-bearing, you have created a problem that gear cannot solve, because the problem is attention. This is where good gear becomes dead weight. when it turns you into a slow-moving advertisement. Weight is only part of it. The bigger killer is friction. Friction is every forced interaction you cannot avoid. Being stopped, questioned, surrounded, redirected, searched, or simply watched. Heavy loadouts increase friction because they reduce your ability to flow through crowds and because they make you memorable. You do not need to be the strongest person in the area. You only need to be less selectable than the next person. In this phase, being forgettable is a survival advantage. A second reason gear fails here is compliance failure. In the shock window, authority is inconsistent, but it is hypersensitive. When systems wobble, the first instinct of institutions is sorting and control. Temporary barricades, ad hoc curfews, random checks. Show me what's in the bag. Gear that is harmless in your head can become a negotiation point in someone else's panic. The more complex your carry, the more time you spend explaining, justifying, and arguing. Time is exposure, and exposure is how small frictions become irreversible outcomes. So what replaces good gear in this phase is a different asset stack. Low signature, high mobility, and pre-decided action. Think in terms of a 3-minute audit. If you had to dump your bag to move fast, what would you regret not having? If you had to walk through a checkpoint without conversation, what on you would start a conversation? If your phone died right now, what would you do in the next 60 minutes? Those questions matter more than any brand or loadout. The replacement kit is not a shopping list. It is a posture. First, reduce your signature, muted clothing, tools carried internally, no external straps, no tactical silhouette, no obvious wealth. Second, reduce your dependency. Assume no power, no fuel access, no reliable maps, no clean water on demand. Third, reduce your decision time. Pick trigger points in advance. For example, if the grid is unstable for 6 hours, I leave the dense zone. Or if communications are down and crowds are forming, I switch routes and avoid hubs. Or if I see sorting behavior, barricades, checks, forced queues, I move before I'm inside it. The people who survive the shock window do not wait for confirmation. They treat uncertainty as the signal. This phase kills through hesitation and visibility, not through lack of equipment. If you want a single sentence to carry forward, it is this. In the first days, your best survival move is to become hard to notice, quick to move, and impossible to delay. Phase 2 is where most people finally accept that the emergency is not ending soon, and that acceptance changes human behavior faster than any shortage does. The shock window was chaos and hesitation. Phase 2 is friction and sorting. Scarcity starts to bite, but the bigger shift is social. People stop acting like customers and start acting like claimants. You see the first real patterns of control: informal checkpoints, territorial groups, neighborhood security, selective enforcement, and targeted theft that looks random to outsiders but is very intentional. This is the phase where good gear becomes dead weight because it creates the worst possible problem. It makes you readable. In phase 2, you are no longer dealing with a crowd. You are dealing with eyes. People begin scanning for two things: weakness and inventory. Weakness gets exploited. Inventory gets harvested. The uncomfortable truth is that a well-equipped person is often easier to profit from than a weak person because inventory can be transferred. When logistics wobble, the world turns into a marketplace of access, and you become a walking storefront if your kit is visible. This is the core mechanism that kills preppers in phase 2, inventory signaling. A big pack, high-end outdoor clothing, a clean rifle case, even obvious medical pouches are not preparedness anymore. They are proof you have something others do not, and phase 2 is when enough people decide that they are justified in taking it. Sometimes it is criminals. Sometimes it is security. Sometimes it is someone with a badge and a bad day. The moral category does not matter. The outcome is the same. Your gear becomes a negotiation, and negotiations in phase 2 are rarely fair. Friction becomes the second killer. Phase 2 is when movement gets harder for reasons unrelated to distance. Roads become unpredictable. Detours become traps. Lines form around essentials, and those lines become controlled spaces, information gathering spaces, where people watch who arrives and what they carry. Informal rules appear: locals first, prove you belong, show your bag, pay a fee, trade to pass. The more gear you carry, the more time you spend managing it, hiding it, explaining it, and protecting it. That time is exposure, and exposure is what turns a manageable situation into a forced confrontation. This is also when heavy defensive gear begins betraying you. Armor, tactical rigs, and overt weapons can be useful in a fight, but Phase 2 is not primarily about fighting. It is about passage. You need to pass through spaces controlled by nervous humans who are looking for reasons to stop you. The more you look like a threat, the more likely you get searched, delayed, redirected, or disarmed. Even if you win a confrontation, you lose the larger game because you become known. Being known in Phase 2 is a liability that compounds. So what replaces good gear here is not less gear, but a different form of preparedness, access over ownership. You stop thinking like a carrier and start thinking like a network. The replacement principle has 4 parts. First is route intelligence and timing. You do not move when everyone moves. You avoid hubs, queues, and bottlenecks because they are sorting machines. You travel off-peak, use secondary routes, and treat any official-looking control point as a potential extraction point for your inventory. In Phase 2, the safest path is often the one that looks inconvenient. Second is distributed storage. A single large stash is a single point of failure, and a single large bag is a single point of loss. Phase 2 favors micro-caches, small, low-value, low-visibility stores placed where you can retrieve them without being observed. This reduces the impact of any one stop, any one search, any one theft. It also changes your psychology. You stop clinging to the bag like it is your life, which makes you more flexible under pressure. Third is low-risk barter. The mistake is carrying valuable barter in obvious forms because valuable barter attracts attention. The replacement approach is trading in small denominations and with plausible covers, items that can be explained, concealed, and surrendered without catastrophic loss. You want the ability to solve small problems quietly, not the ability to make one impressive trade that gets you remembered. Fourth is social camouflage and legitimacy. Phase 2 is when belonging starts to matter. The lone, heavily equipped stranger is the most suspicious profile in the environment. What replaces your dependence on gear is your ability to appear non-extractive, to have a reason to be where you are, to look like you are going somewhere normal, to speak in a way that lowers tension, and to avoid broadcasting confidence. Confidence reads as capability. Capability reads as inventory. Inventory invites sorting. If Phase 1 punished visibility through chaos, Phase 2 punishes visibility through intent. Your equipment does not just weigh you down, it paints you into a category that other people have started targeting. The winning move in Phase 2 is to stop being a prize and start being hard to classify. Because the next phase is worse. It is where the environment stops taking from you in moments and starts taking from you every day through wear, breakdown, and the slow violence of maintenance. Phase 3 is the scarcity regime, and it is where most good gear dies the way people die, not dramatically, but through attrition. The environment stops being a series of incidents and becomes a long, grinding system of daily losses. In Phase 1, you could survive by moving early. In Phase 2, you could survive by avoiding friction and sorting. In Phase 3, you are forced to live inside failure, and the main enemy is no longer a person. The main enemy is maintenance. This is the phase that exposes the hidden weakness of modern preparedness. Most gear is not built to be used every day without a supply chain behind it. It is built to bridge a gap until systems return. In Phase 3, systems do not return, and the bill comes due. Filters clog, batteries degrade, seals dry out, fabrics tear, adhesives fail, footwear breaks down, and every small failure becomes an escalating problem because replacement parts are not available, and the environment is harsher than your gear was designed for. The mistake people make here is thinking the danger is having less. The real danger is having equipment that requires constant inputs you cannot guarantee. Phase 3 introduces a brutal concept, consumable dependency. Anything that needs cartridges, specialized fuel, proprietary parts, or frequent replacement becomes a liability, no matter how high-end it is. It is not enough that it works today. It must be sustainable under repeated use, dirty conditions, and improvisation. This is why good gear becomes dead weight in this phase. It turns into a system you must feed, and feeding it competes with feeding yourself. Power is the clearest example. In early collapse, people treat electricity as a temporary inconvenience. In Phase 3, electricity becomes a predator. It forces behavior, scavenging runs, noise, light at night, predictable patterns, and exposure to the same dangerous spaces over and over. Generators, power stations, and large battery setups are not automatically wrong, but the moment you cannot reliably fuel, repair, and conceal them, they stop being support tools and start being risk amplifiers. The biggest trap is that they work well enough at the beginning to make you dependent and then fail when the cost of replacing them is highest. In Phase 3, the question is not how much power can I produce, it is how little power do I need to live safely. That is a completely different mindset. Water and sanitation do the same thing. Many people imagine Phase 3 as a food problem, but it is more often a water hygiene problem disguised as a food problem. When clean water is inconsistent and waste handling is degraded, illness becomes common and slow. Diarrhea, skin infections, respiratory irritation, parasites, contaminated wounds. These do not look like the cinematic collapse, but they quietly destroy energy, judgment, and mobility. Here again, good gear can become dead weight if it encourages a single-point solution. One filter type, one chemical treatment, one perfect system. Phase 3 punishes single points of failure. Redundancy that looks boring is what keeps you alive. Multiple water treatment pathways, basic hygiene discipline, and the ability to recover from mistakes without a pharmacy. Medical gear also flips here. A large, impressive kit feels like security, but in Phase 3 you cannot rely on resupply. And you cannot treat chronic conditions with heroic items. You need prevention and routine first. Blister control, skin care, dental basics, infection avoidance, safe food handling, and rest discipline. A small cut that is ignored becomes a systemic risk. A bad tooth becomes a survival crisis. The replacement is not more medical gadgets. It is a lifestyle that reduces injury rates, reduces exposure, and keeps your body from becoming the weak link. So what replaces good gear in Phase 3 is a different preparedness model. low-tech systems, repairability, and production capacity. You stop thinking in terms of items and start thinking in terms of loops. Can you purify water repeatedly with what you have? Can you keep warm without burning through scarce fuel? Can you cook without making yourself obvious? Can you preserve food without refrigeration? Can you fix your clothing and footwear without shopping? Can you maintain tools without specialized parts? If the answer is no, then your gear is not a solution. It is a short-term loan with interest. A practical way to frame Phase 3 is the maintenance debt test. Every piece of gear carries a debt: cleaning, storage, repair, consumables, and time. When the debt is low, you can pay it forever. When the debt is high, it will bankrupt you at the worst moment. High-debt gear is anything that is complex, specialized, or dependent on precise inputs. Low-debt gear is simple, durable, common, and fixable with basic skills and improvised materials. This is the phase where the winners look less tactical and more boring. They prioritize quiet heat, repeatable water treatment, basic sanitation, simple tools, repair skills, and routines. They are not trying to dominate the environment. They are trying to outlast it. And that brings you into Phase 4, where outlasting is no longer only about systems and routine, because the world begins to reorganize around groups, territory, and legitimacy. At that point, the most dangerous dead weight is not in your bag. It is the idea that you can do it alone. Phase 4 is where the collapse stops feeling like an emergency and starts functioning like a new world. This is the phase of fragmentation and new order, and it is the point where the solo mindset quietly becomes the most dangerous dead weight you can carry. If Phase 3 is a war against maintenance, Phase 4 is a war against governance, territory, and legitimacy. Systems may still be broken. Supply chains may still be unreliable, and life may still be harsh. But the defining shift is social. Groups consolidate, boundaries harden, rules appear, and survival becomes less about what you own and more about what you are allowed to access. This is where good gear fails in a way that shocks people. Not because it stops working, but because it stops being the currency that matters. In Phase 4, the most valuable resources are no longer loose items. The most valuable resources are land, water rights, stable food production, safe routes, and control of infrastructure. Those are group-level assets. An individual walking around with great equipment does not look powerful in this phase. They look like a problem that has not been sorted yet. Fragmentation means different zones develop different authorities. One area may be controlled by a local council, another by a militia, another by a criminal patron, another by a corporation-backed security force, and another by informal clan networks. It does not matter what label you put on them. Functionally, they all do the same thing. They decide who belongs, what the rules are, what taxes exist, and what happens to people who do not comply. This is when the lone, heavily equipped person becomes the worst possible profile. You look mobile, capable, and unaccountable. And unaccountable is what every authority fears because it threatens stability. Phase 4 punishes unaccountability. The most common error here is believing that being armed and skilled is enough to remain independent. Independence sounds heroic, but in Phase 4, it often translates to no one will protect you, no one will trade with you fairly, and no one will tolerate you moving freely. Even if you are strong, you cannot be strong everywhere at once. You cannot sleep and watch your perimeter at the same time. You cannot farm, patrol, repair, and scout continuously without burning out. The human body has limits, and Phase 4 is long-duration life. The lone wolf plan fails not because of one fight, but because of exhaustion and inevitability. Here is the brutal shift. In Phase 4, access beats capability. You can be extremely capable and still be denied access to wells, roads, markets, medical help, shelter, and safe sleep. You can have the perfect kit and still be turned away at a boundary because you do not have legitimacy. Gear cannot buy legitimacy. At best, it can buy a short negotiation. At worst, it marks you as someone worth disarming. So, what replaces good gear in Phase 4 is not a new set of items. It is a new category of survival asset, social capital, and role value. Your goal is to become a person who belongs somewhere, because belonging is what generates protection, information, and predictable access. This happens through role, contribution, and trust, not through intimidation. Role value means you are useful in a way that is hard to replace. Not, I have a rifle, because everyone will have a rifle. Useful means you can repair critical tools, maintain water systems, manage sanitation, deliver medical competence, teach, organize security routines, produce food, or build. Your gear should support that role, not broadcast it. A person with quiet competence and a clear function is tolerated. A person with high-end gear and no function is suspected. Contribution matters because Phase 4 runs on reciprocity. Groups survive by filtering out parasites and absorbing producers. If you want protection, you need to be seen producing. This is why the replacement principle includes predictable contribution, helping with work cycles, sharing information, rotating security, or trading services consistently. This is how you transition from outsider to member, and membership is the real survival advantage of this phase. Trust is the final gate, and it has its own mechanics. Trust is not granted by speeches. It is granted by behavior over time, respecting rules, not creating drama, not bringing unnecessary risk, and not signaling hidden inventory. In Phase 4, the person who constantly displays gear, upgrades, and tactical posture is often read as someone who is planning options, not commitments. Groups do not like people who appear to have one foot out the door, because that person is a future liability. The irony is that the more you advertise self-sufficiency, the more you trigger suspicion that you are non-aligned. This is where good gear becomes dead weight in the most literal sense. It weighs you down while offering diminishing returns, and it can even block your integration because it broadcasts outsider with resources. The replacement is a quieter, role-driven kit paired with alliance building, tools for repair and production, items for hygiene and prevention, small barter that does not scream wealth, and the discipline to look ordinary while being useful. Phase 4 is not about outlasting the collapse as an individual. It is about outlasting the collapse as part of a structure. If you do not consciously shift from carry mode to community mode, you will eventually be forced into that shift under pressure, and forced shifts are where people lose gear, freedom, or life. If you want a single takeaway from all 4 phases, it is this. Collapse does not reward the best gear. It rewards the fastest adaptation. Good gear becomes dead weight the moment it increases your signature, increases your dependency, or increases your friction with other humans. Those 3 forces are what quietly select victims across every phase, and if you can learn to test your kit through that lens, you stop preparing for fantasies and start preparing for reality. Use a simple audit that you can run on any item you own in under a minute. The first test is the signature test. Ask, does this make me more noticeable, more memorable, or more interesting to the wrong people? Signature is not only visual, it is sound, light, smell, and behavior. A generator has a signature. A tactical-looking backpack has a signature. A bright headlamp at night has a signature. Even stopping to adjust a heavy load in public is a signature because it draws eyes. If the item increases your signature, then in Phase 1 and Phase 2, it is already half dead weight because attention is a tax you cannot afford to pay. The second test is the dependency test. Ask, what inputs does this require to keep working, and can I guarantee those inputs repeatedly? Inputs include fuel, batteries, filters, cartridges, proprietary parts, specialized lubricants, and even clean conditions. If you cannot sustain the inputs, the item is not a tool, it is a countdown. This is why Phase 3 destroys people who built their plan around high-performance systems without considering maintenance debt. Gear that works brilliantly for 2 weeks and then collapses is worse than gear that works modestly for a year, because it trains you into dependence and then fails when replacement is impossible. The third test is the friction test. Ask, does this force me into interactions I cannot control? In Phase 2, friction looks like checkpoints, sorting behavior, questions, and searches. In Phase 4, friction looks like rules, boundaries, taxes, and legitimacy tests. Gear that makes you look like a threat or makes you look like a walking inventory increases friction. Gear that makes you slower increases friction because you cannot exit situations early. Gear that makes you argue increases friction because arguing draws escalation. In collapse, friction compounds faster than any other risk. Once you apply those tests, the replacement stack becomes clear, and it maps directly to the phases. In Phase 1, replace gear confidence with mobility and decisiveness. Your objective is not to fight. It is to exit uncertainty before it hardens. Low signature, light carry, and pre-decided triggers beat impressive equipment every time. In Phase 2, replace ownership with access. Your objective is not to look capable. It is to avoid being categorized as a prize or a threat. Route intelligence, distributed storage, low-risk barter, and social camouflage keep you moving without becoming memorable. In Phase 3, replace gadgets with systems. Your objective is not to be comfortable, it is to be sustainable. Low-tech loops, repairability, redundancy, sanitation discipline, and production capacity. Water, heat, food preservation, tool maintenance are what turn survival from a series of emergencies into a stable routine. In Phase 4, replace solo pride with legitimacy. Your objective is not to prove you can survive alone. It is to secure predictable access inside a new order. Role value, contribution, alliances, and trust building become more protective than any plate carrier, because the dominant threats are governance and exclusion, not random violence. This is why the smartest preparedness is not adding more. It is subtracting the wrong things and upgrading the right principles. Most people want a list because lists feel controllable, but collapse is not controlled by your shopping decisions. Collapse is controlled by how quickly you notice the phases changed and how ruthlessly you align your behavior to the new rules. If you want to take action immediately, do this. Pick the 10 heaviest or most expensive items in your kit and run the 3 tests on them. Anything that fails 2 out of 3 needs a replacement plan, not a defense speech. Then build your kit around phase-aligned principles. Low signature, low dependency, low friction, plus mobility, sustainability, and legitimacy. Because when the world breaks, you do not die from lacking gear. You die from carrying the wrong solutions into the wrong phase and refusing to let go until it is too late.